Well, it's not long after I took that test ride on this Crusader and I got it back on the bike lift just to do one last job that I was asked to do, subject to success, and that was remove the catch bottle, which was cable tied through an engine bolt hole, and replace the missing stud and nuts. So I've done that, and also verified that the oil level is steady. In fact, there was a syringe full of oil that I sucked out the engine the other day, which I just put back in, and that's taken us to within about half an inch of the full mark on the dipstick now. I thought I'd just sort of go over a couple of things. I've made quite a few videos about this one recently, with this recent so-called, what we all assumed, or myself and the owner assumed, was a problem with the breather, the crankcase breather, but it turned out to be a problem with the scavenging of the oil out of the crankcase. And obviously I had a good look at the oil pump early on and decided that was pretty well worn out, so we put a new one in, and that seemed to work for a little while, but then things sort of went wrong again, and I noticed that oil was disappearing off the dipstick as well as blowing out of the breather. It didn't really blow out in huge amounts from the breather, but enough to make a mess, and it wasn't right. So it threw me a few, shall we say, curved balls, this machine, to begin with. Obviously I went over the basic obvious things first, but it dawned on me that if this wasn't scavenging with a new oil pump fitted, then something else was obviously wrong. And I started to suspect, as I've seen before actually on occasion, that the scavenge oil pipe might have been blocked, or maybe the screws might have been loose. I've even had that before, which obviously compromises the oil pump's suction of the oil out. But it was fastened down nicely, but I ended up disconnecting it and sort of gently persuading it to bend out the way slightly. And I also had this is an earlier oil pipes assembly for a Crusader. The later ones, as we have seen in here, have a built-in suction filter for the scavenge line, and I had a look at that, and at one point I found one, well, larger than you'd like to see piece of aluminium in there, but obviously small enough to get sucked through the pipe and into the filter chamber. But I found, after fitting a new oil pump, now whether it was because the suction of the new oil pump was stronger than the old one, which it obviously would have been, maybe it just sucked some bits in that weren't really lodged against anything at one end of it, perhaps sucked them further in and packed them tighter together and effectively blanked the pipe off. Because with a lot of effort and persuasion with the airline and rodding through with wire and things, this is what I got out in total. Now there's my finger just for a sort of size comparison, but those sort of 5 blue bits there, they're silicon, bits of silicon sealant. All the others are bits of aluminium. Now at some time in this engine's life, and it's not the only one to do this, it's blown up, and I think a piston has broken up, and then bits of it have probably hit the flywheels and whatever and got smashed into little bits and sucked up by the scavenge pump while the engine was still spinning, and sucked into the scavenge pipe. Then of course there's been a bang or something and the engine's been stopped, stripped down, possibly even rebuilt, and obviously if the crankcases were split, which I think they probably would have been, because I think at some time this engine had a full rebuild, any sort of broken bits and pieces found in the crankcases, I'm sure, would have probably been obvious and been cleaned out, removed. But perhaps not everybody might be aware that some bits might have already got sucked into this pipe and be lurking in there, as was the case with this one, because all of those things there came out of that, the equivalent of this short little scavenge pipe as fitted in there. That lot put together and sucked together and packed, perhaps at one of the junctions of the pipework, is going to close it off. And with that removed, we're obviously out of trouble. And one last thing, there was a couple of comments about, oh, the engine will have to be stripped, there'll be bits inside it and whatever. Well, when it was wet sumped, I removed that plug there and drained all the oil that hadn't been pumped back to the tank like it should have been. There's probably a pint or more of it. I took that plug out and got a really good, fast, strong flow coming out of that passageway from the crankcase. So that says to me that there's no problem in there. And also, there were no bits of metal came out with that oil. So I think, as I said, probably the engine was stripped and rebuilt, and I reckon that any debris seen in the crankcases was obviously cleaned out. But that scavenge pipe was probably overlooked, or not even noticed even, because it's hidden away in there, and you don't have to remove this lot when you strip the engine. Easy to miss. I think that's what happened, and I'm pretty confident that we've got a good engine here at last without having to have gone to the trouble of removing it and stripping it right down. And I'm going to sort of stand by that. I'm pretty confident that it's all right now, and as we saw on the test ride, it's producing a lot more power, definitely. The response to the throttle and the way it pulled up those hills and accelerated was a lot better than it had been previously. As I already said, the crankshaft flywheels wouldn't be dragging themselves around in a load of oil that wasn't getting pumped out of there anymore. So I think we're done, and I think that's why. Just take one last look at that lot in there, and all that lot was lurking in the scavenge pipe and blocking it off and causing the bulk of the trouble.